Hello everyone, welcome to the lecture series on respiratory physiology. In the respiratory physiology, the first chapter which we are discussing today is on respiratory apparatus. Respiration means it is all the process that is involved in the exchange of the gases, that is the oxygen and the carbon dioxide, is referred to be as the respiration. The respiratory apparatus are those structures that are involved in the respiration process. There are three major divisions of this respiratory apparatus, which involves number one, air passages. It is also referred to be as airways or conducting pathways. These are the structures that are involved in movement or conducting of the air from the external environment to that inside of the lungs. The second most important structure that is involved, which is the principal structure, that is involved in the respiration, is the lungs. Basically, the exchange of the gases occurs in the alveoli, which is present in the lungs. The third important structure is the pleura. The pleura is the serous membrane which encompasses or covers the principal organ, that is the lungs. So coming for the air passages, first are the airways. Number one, the first part that could be seen is nostrils. Nostrils, or it is also called nares, which are the paired external openings to the air passages. So these are the two external openings that could be seen through which the air flows inside and outside through the external layers. These are the most pliable structures. Most importantly, in case of horse, these are dilatable. They can increase in the diameter. It is most important in case of a horse because, number one, horses are obligate nose breathers. They only breathe through the nose. They are obligate nose breathers. They will not breathe through the mouth. So increase, and they are runners. So whenever they go for running, it is important that there is in need of more of oxygen. So to take in more amount of air, the external nares become distendable so that more amount of air can get inside. Whereas in case of pigs, it is just opposite. The nares are too rigid. They'll never distend as that of the horses. So through the nares, the next part where the air flow is seen is towards the nasal cavity. So this is P. So the air moves through the nasal cavity. So this nasal cavity is separated by a septum referred to be as nasal septum. Nasal septum. And it is separated from the mouth by the hard and the soft palate. The hard and the soft palate separates this nasal cavity. And it contains what is referred to be as turbinate bones. These contains turbinate bones. So these are the turbinate bones, which are lined by the mucous membrane. So you do have the turbinate bones here. It is also called as concave. It is also called as concave. This is mucus covered and it has got a very rich blood supply. So therefore, this turbinate bones or the concave, number one, it helps in humidification of the inhaled air. So during inspiration, whatever the air goes in through the turbinate bones, it gets humidified. And therefore it warms the air that is being inhaled. Number two, these turbinate bones are also involved in cooling of the arterial blood that is going into the brain. So it has got small arteries which are embedded in a group of veins. So this is most important because the brain is such a structure which is heat sensitive. We know the arterial blood carries warm blood, so before it reaches to the brain, it has to be cooled down. So turbinate bones also helps in cooling down of the blood so that the smaller arteries are embedded on the venous system so that the heat exchange occurs by counter current mechanism. Counter current mechanism. So it can be seen just below the circle of Willis where there is carotid reti or reti of Mirabile, where there is heat exchange between the arterial and the venous blood through counter current heat exchange process. So the next part, from the nasal cavity, it passes through the third structure, pharynx. So this is the nasal cavity. From the nasal cavity, it passes through the pharynx. Pharynx is a common passage for both food and the air. From the pharynx, it enters into the next structure called larynx. Larynx is the organ of phonation. That is, the sound is produced from the larynx. So whenever the air moves, it causes the vibrations of the vocal cord, which produces the sound or the phonation. Whereas in case of birds, the organ of phonation is syrinx. Is the organ of phonation in case of birds, which is located where the trachea divides to form the bronchi. So we do have a structure called glottis. Glottis is the slit like opening between the vocal cords. Cranial to that of the glottis, they do have the extension which is referred to be as epiglottis. Epiglottis is a leaf-like cranial extension of the glottis which will prevent the entry of food or the bolus into the trachea during the swallowing process. So it prevents the entry of the bolus through whenever the food is swallowed. From the larynx, it leads to a structure called trachea. Trachea. So trachea is also called as windpipe. It is a tube-like structure. It is the primary passageway for the air into the lungs. It is made up of cartilaginous rings. But most importantly, these cartilaginous rings are C-shaped and they are incomplete. That is, they are not joined, especially in the dorsal position. This is very much important to prevent the collapse of the trachea, and also the diameter can be adjusted by the smooth muscles that are present. This trachea later divides into right and the left bronchi. The bronchi then divides into the bronchioles, different types of bronchioles like terminal bronchioles, respiratory bronchioles, etc. And it leads to alveolar ducts and the alveolar sac, which consists of the primary site of gas exchange, the alveoli. This whole structure is referred to be as the tracheobronchial tree. That is, the branches of the trachea into the bronchi, then into the this bronchi is partitioned to 23 generations, where each generation gives rise to 2 daughter generations here. Again it goes on dividing. So you do have 23 generations of tracheobronchial tree, which is given by Weibull model. Weibull model. And if you see the epithelial cells, near the bronchi, it is lined by columnar epithelial cells which are ciliated. Later, when it goes deep inside, it becomes cuboidal, whereas the alveoli is lined by simple squamous epithelial cell. The alveolar duct is connected to the alveoli through a structure called atria. Now coming for the alveoli, it is present in the principal structure of the respiratory system, the lungs. It is the principal site of gas diffusion. So the gas diffusion or the gas exchange occurs in alveoli. So this alveoli is made up of 3 different cells. They are also called pneumocytes. The first type of cell what the alveoli is made up of is type 1 alveolar cells. The type 1 alveolar cells are flat squamous epithelial cells which are involved in gas exchange process. So this is the type 1. You do have the second type called type 2 alveolar cells, those which are cuboidal, and these are involved in the production of surfactant, the substance called surfactant. So surfactant is produced by type 2 alveolar cells. So the type 1 alveolar cells are more in number than that of type 2 alveolar cells. So what are surfactants? What are its function? We'll see it later on. The third type of cell that could be seen in an alveoli is alveolar macrophages. So these are the phagocytic cells that are present in the alveoli. The next important structure we should know is about the respiratory membrane. It is also called exchange membrane. This is a thin membrane across which the gas exchange occurs, or the diffusion of the oxygen and the carbon dioxide occurs across this membrane. It is too thin. It may range anywhere from 0.5 to 2 micrometer in thickness. So it's the thinnest membrane which is seen in the alveoli, where the gas exchange occurs between alveoli and the blood, or you can say the capillaries. So what it is made up of? It is made up of, number 1, so this layer. So this is made up of alveolar epithelial cells. So it is made up of, as we have already seen, alveolar epithelial cells. So we already stated the alveoli consists of 2 types of epithelial cell, type 1 and type 2. Type 1 epithelial cell is involved in the gas exchange. Type 2 is involved in the production of surfactant. So it is the alveolar epithelial cells of the type 1 alveolar cells is the first layer. And we do have the second layer, which is the basement membrane, which is the basement membrane of the epithelial cell. Anyway, it is close to each other, but only for the diagrammatic explanation it is being enlarged. The third is the interstitial space or extracellular matrix space, which consists of interstitial fluid, interstitial space with the interstitial fluid. And the next is the fourth endothelial basement membrane, and the fifth, the endothelium of the capillaries. So the respiratory membrane has got the components from the alveolar side and it has the component from capillary side, so that there can be exchange of the gases between these two through the interstitial fluid. It is a thin membrane so that the gas exchange can occur easily, it can diffuse easily. So you do have the epithelium of the alveolar epithelial cell, basement membrane of the epithelial cell, interstitial space, basement membrane of the endothelium, and the endothelial cell or the endothelium. So the diffusion of the gas is explained by Fick's law, which states the movement of the gas is directly proportional to the area and the diffusion constant, and also difference between the partial pressures, and it is indirectly proportional to the thickness of the membrane. So by this we can say that the respiratory membrane is thinner, which will always facilitates the diffusion. So for some reason, if this respiratory membrane becomes thicker, then the movement of the gases or diffusion of the gases is decreased.